So that is the goal, to love like Jesus. That's Concordia's mission, building generations who live and love like Jesus. And that's actually possible. Because when by faith you're connected with Jesus, sort of like those shoots coming off the vine, Jesus' life and Jesus' love kind of flows into you and flows through you and begins to change you, overriding that me-first way of looking at love and slowly but surely replacing it with Jesus' kind of love. Selfless, serving, giving, sacrificial, undeserved, unconditional. But living the Jesus way is hard. And loving the Jesus way is, well, it's hard. Sometimes you're tired and weary and worn out and stressed out and maybe even on the verge of burnout. And it's hard to keep loving like Jesus at times like that. And sometimes it seems as if you're just always holding it together for everybody else, and you just want to start thinking about you for a change. And it's hard to keep loving like Jesus at times like that. And sometimes you've been at it for so long and giving so much to so many others that, again, you're just worn out and worn down. And again, it's hard to keep loving other people like Jesus did when at times like that, because when you're worn out and worn down, it's pretty easy to think and say and do some rather unloving things. So how do you get to that place where you love like Jesus? How do you get to that place where you love like Jesus even a little bit? And how where you can love like Jesus a little bit more, well, consistently? And how can you grow in loving like Jesus even when the people around you are making it, well, kind of hard to do that? There are some hints in the words of Jesus. John chapter 15, starting at verse 9. Listen.
As the Father has loved me, so have I loved you. Now remain in my love. If you keep my commands, you will remain in my love, just as I have kept my Father's commands and remain in his love. I have told you this so that my joy may be in you, and that your joy may be complete. My command is this: love each other as I have loved you. Greater love has no one than this, to lay down one's life for one's friends. You are my friends, if you do what I command. I no longer call you servants, because a servant does not know his master's business. Instead, I have called you friends. For everything that I learned from my Father, I have made known to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you, so that you might go and bear fruit that will last, and so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. This is my command. Love each other.
So let's start here. Jesus said, verse 9, remain in my love. So hint number one to loving like Jesus is to remain in Jesus, right? To keep connected closely, like that vine and the branches thing. Now, why would Jesus have to tell you to remain in his love, to stay connected to him if you've already experienced how good his love is? Well, probably because you also have this original wiring system that's still a part of you. A wiring system that says, love self first. Love others only if you're feeling it. Love only if there's something in it for you, or love only if it doesn't cost too much. And that message is constantly being reinforced by the culture around us. It's all about pleasure for you messages. Well, they're everywhere, aren't they? And because they are everywhere, it looks and it sounds, well, so right, so appealing. So this is the way that it should be, to make everything about me and my needs and my wants and my happiness. And because of that, the temptation is going to be to disconnect from Jesus in order to chase after that, well, but it feels good. but it makes me happy kind of love. I wonder how many messes have been caused by that little journey. No wonder Jesus says, remain in my love. Or as the Message translation puts it, let me read it to you, make yourself at home in my love. In other words, stay closely connected, not loosely connected to Jesus. Why? Because, well, loving like Jesus is so unnatural and so countercultural that the only way that you can actually grow in loving like Jesus is to stay closely connected to Jesus so that his life and his love flows through you and into you. And maybe you've heard a million messages on how to do that, about how you can not only stay connected to Jesus, but deepen your connection to Jesus. I mean, spend regular, even daily time with Jesus in Bible and prayer. Spend regular and consistent time with Jesus along with other people, like in on-site, in-person worship, and in communion, and in groups. So I'm not telling you something that you probably don't know, maybe instinctively already, but Jesus' point is actually do that. All right, actually do that. Another point in this same conversation that Jesus had with his disciples that night, Jesus said this, now that you know these things, you will be blessed if you do them. That's John 13, verse 17. So before we move on in this conversation, stop and think about this for a moment. What's pulling you away from a deeper connection with Jesus right now? And what do you need to do to stay close to him? And then make it really practical by asking yourself, what are you doing to make that a priority in your schedule? Hit pause and do that right now. Here's hint number 2 to loving like Jesus. Hint number 2 is retrain your mind. Retrain your mind to define love like Jesus does. Here's what Jesus said, verse 12, love each other as I have loved you. Which means, number 1, that love isn't an emotion, it's a choice. Right? Do you think Jesus was happy about the cross? I mean, the prayer in the garden and the drops of blood that he sweat in the garden that night before he went to the cross, well, that would suggest otherwise. But Jesus chose the cross anyway, because love is a choice. Number 2, love isn't earned, it's undeserved and unconditional. I mean, who did Jesus go to the cross for? Just hours after he spoke these words. For Judas, the one who betrayed him. For Peter, James, and John, who fell asleep on the job. For every one of his closest disciples, including Peter, James, and John, who then ran away to save their own skin rather than staying around to support him. To Peter, again, who denied him. I mean, 1, 2, 3 strikes and you're out. And for the chief priests. For the chief priests and the teachers of the law who schemed to put him there on the cross. And for Pilate, who gave the order to put him on the cross, even though he knew that he was an innocent man. And for the soldiers who beat him and whipped him and made fun of him and put those nails in his hands and his feet. Did any of them deserve his love? I mean, Jesus didn't just die for those who you might think deserved it. Jesus died for the unworthy and for the unlovable and for the undesirable and even for the unredeemable. I mean, including, by the way, well, every single one of us. Romans chapter 5, verse 8 says this, God demonstrates his own love for us in this. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. according to that little bit of Bible, we don't deserve God's love either. I mean, but God loves us anyway. God loves us anyway, because loving Jesus' way isn't earned, it's undeserved and unconditional. And number 3, love Jesus' way isn't a feeling, love is an action. Now, here's a little Bible to get you started thinking on that one. 1 John chapter 3, verse 16. We know what love is because Jesus Christ gave his life for us. Giving his life isn't just a lecture, a thought, it's an action. And Colossians chapter 3, verse 13, put up with one another. Forgive one another if you're holding something against someone. Forgive, just as the Lord forgave you. Again, forgiving is an action, something that you're doing for somebody else. So that's loving like Jesus, which again, while it is the right way, it can sometimes be really, really hard. And I want you to think about that for a minute before we move on here. What part of defining love like Jesus does is most challenging for you right now? Is it that love isn't an emotion, it's a choice? Is it that love isn't earned, that it's undeserved and unconditional? Or is it love isn't a feeling, it's an action? Again, hit pause and think about which of those is most challenging for you right now. You know, for me, I think it's that middle one, where love isn't earned, it's undeserved and unconditional. See, because when people aren't being very loving toward me, in fact, when they're doing some rather unloving things toward me or somebody close to me or those I love, when they're doing that, it's really hard for me to even think like that, much less to do something loving toward them. So if you've ever found yourself in a situation like me, maybe this will help. Retrain your mind to think that way anyway. All right? And maybe when you're finding it hard to love someone like Jesus would, again, as you've retrained your mind, start here. Start telling yourself, well, I don't feel love. I choose love. And I don't like that it's hard, but I choose to be like Jesus anyway. I choose to treat you like God treats me. I choose action over emotion. I choose service and sacrifice over self. You don't deserve my love, but I'm going to love you anyway. And I'll make a choice. I'll make a choice to serve, to sacrifice, to be selfless in this situation, even though I don't really feel like it at this moment. That's the Jesus way. And just wondering, how many relationships could be salvaged? How many relationships could be salvaged if people worked at that? But this is hard, right? Sometimes really hard. And Jesus knows that. And so there's something else he talks about in this conversation. Yeah, number 1, remain connected to Jesus. Number 2, retrain your mind to define love the way Jesus does. And number 3, request help. All right, request help. That's what I think Jesus was talking about here in verse 16. Let me read it to you. You did not choose me, but I chose you and appointed you so that you might go and bear fruit, fruit that will last. And so that whatever you ask in my name, the Father will give you. Now, a lot of people zero in on that last part and say, whatever you ask in my name, I can ask, gimme. I want this and this and this and this. But when you read that in the context of this whole conversation, I don't think it's an isolated thing like, let's make Jesus our special Santa Claus. I think what he's doing there, he's saying, request help to live and to love like he did. So ask anything there from that perspective isn't this laundry list of gimme, 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 and gimme more, and gimme more, and gimme more. I think that Jesus sees how hard it is for us to love like that. And Jesus actually knows that his friends who he's talking to, after they see his death and resurrection, are going to start to understand what he meant when he said, love like I have loved you, and how hard it would be for them to do what he was asking. I mean, just think about how many times the disciples, even with each other, were struggling to love each other. Remember how many times they would have one disciple pushing in front of the other, or they'd be arguing about the greatest. It seems like Satan seems to work really, really hard at getting church people to interact in some very un-Christ-like ways. Loving the Jesus way is hard. And so Jesus says, let your ask anything start there. All right, Jesus says, ask for my help. Ask, well, Jesus, help me remain in you. Jesus, help me define love the way you define love. Jesus, help me treat others the way that you treated me, and love this person like you love me. Jesus, help me to love this person when it's hard and when I'm not feeling it. Help me love them like you love them, even when it's hard, and to make that choice to love and to act in love. Jesus, help me. And Jesus wants you to do that. He wants you to ask him for help. He wants you to ask him for help in growing and loving like he did, because loving like Jesus has a real impact in the world and in your own life. And not only because Jesus knows that when we love like he does, it points other people to him. Remember what they said about the disciples? See how they love one another. And it makes a real impact not only because it's the right thing to do. Jesus said, this is my command that you do this, not my suggestion, not my advice, not a nice idea. This is my command that you do this. He knows it makes a real impact in our lives not only because it makes your relationship with others better, but also because as we grow in loving like Jesus, here's the fourth hint that Jesus is telling you here. You can recover your joy. When you grow in loving like Jesus, you can recover joy for yourself. Verse 11, Jesus says, I have told you this so that my joy may be in you and that your joy may be complete. And that short little phrase, my joy, it's important because it reminds us that Jesus isn't simply talking about emotions here, as if joy and happiness were the same thing, which they're not. Now, it's true that loving like Jesus does put you in a better position to experience happiness, and loving like Jesus leads you to happy feeling spaces more often, more frequently. But as we've talked about, loving like Jesus is also hard. And loving like Jesus can sometimes temporarily put you in places where you're not feeling all that happy about doing it. But when you press on and push through and make a choice to keep on loving like Jesus even when you're not feeling it, Jesus does lead you to a place of greater joy, right? And he does that because just like love, joy isn't just about your emotions. Joy is actually found, true joy is actually found in the result of what your loving actions produce, and both in your life and in the lives of others. Check this out.
Therefore, since we are surrounded by such a great cloud of witnesses, let us throw off everything that hinders and the sin that so easily entangles. Let us run with perseverance the race marked out for us, fixing our eyes on Jesus, the pioneer and perfecter of faith. For the joy set before him, he endured the cross, scorning its shame, and sat down at the right hand of the throne of God. Consider him who endured such opposition, so you will not grow weary and lose heart.
No, the cross wasn't a fun place or a happy place. It was a sacrificial place, a giving place, and at the time, a very hard and painful place. And yet Jesus willingly chose that and actually found joy in the cross. He found joy in the cross not because of the pain of the cross, but because of what the cross produced and because of what his love poured out for us on the cross made possible for us to be reconciled, reconnected with God, and to have a relationship with him that lasts forever. Now, if you're a believer, you are the reason that Jesus found joy in the cross. And the reason that Jesus chose to love the way that he did, serving and sacrificing and giving and thinking of us more than he thought of himself, and more than he thought about what loving would cost him. And when you start growing in loving like Jesus, well, you can start to find joy in the results of living in love just as I've loved you, even when you're not particularly happy about things. I mean, you can start to find joy and blessing simply in finding a better path. You can start to find joy and blessing in finding a way to work through those tough spots in relationships. You find joy and blessing in giving, even when it's sacrificial. I mean, you find joy and blessing in seeing that you're actually becoming a little more like Jesus. And you find joy and blessing in seeing the effects and the results of what that kind of loving like Jesus has in the lives of others. I mean, the people who went on our mission trip to Guatemala, they discovered that. The people who supported the Day of the Child mission in Tijuana, they discovered that. And the people who've given sacrificially of their money or sacrificially of their time to push the mission of the church forward, they've discovered that. And you know what? As you work at loving like Jesus with the people in your lives, even when you don't feel like it, and you start to see the difference that makes both in their life and in yours, well, you experience some of that same joy yourself too. So let me encourage you to do what we've been talking about today, right? To remain connected to Jesus, to retrain your mind to define love the way Jesus does, to request help from Jesus to do that, and then to rediscover a deep and abiding joy in your life as you're seeing the results of what loving like Jesus does. Remember what Jesus says, now that you know these things, you're blessed if you do them. Before we wrap this up, let me give you a little bonus. Something sort of practical, I think. Maybe not so spiritual, but practical. I was reading some things from John Ortberg this week. And as I was doing that, I came across some of his thoughts, coincidentally, on loving like Jesus. And maybe those thoughts don't seem all that spiritual, but they're, I think, intensely practical. So I wanted to pass them on as sort of well, maybe I could get started here in loving like Jesus. So one of the things he said was that loving like Jesus takes a lot of energy, right? And it does, right? So what he was saying, he suggested that if he was going to be more loving, very practically, he needed to get more sleep. So that's on my list now. Get more sleep. Then I'll have a little more of the energy to love like Jesus. Second thing he said was that loving like Jesus also requires a tremendous amount of time. And so an enemy of that kind of love is all the clutter that's in our lives, all the pace of our lives and the 35 hours of activities we try to cram into every 24-hour day. Again, what he suggests is if I want to grow in loving like Jesus, maybe I need to simplify my schedule a little bit. Simplify my schedule and intentionally practice what he called an unhurried life. And that means maybe remove some of the clutter of the day and cut out even some of the good activities in my schedule so that I can even take some moments to enjoy solitude. And then the third thing he reminded me of is he said, loving like Jesus, besides requiring energy, so I get more sleep, and besides requiring time, so I maybe simplify my schedule, it also requires a tremendous amount of patience. And because of that, what he suggested was that we intentionally practice servanthood. Servanthood even in small things like letting somebody else go first, whether it's in line or even in traffic, or holding our tongue, or bearing with other people when we know that we're in the right. I mean, that's the practical side of cultivating love. That's a place maybe that you can start. It's not as important as remaining connected to Christ, because Jesus is the source and the strength of our love. But those are very important things in growing bigger and better fruit, kind of like fertilizer that you can use for the plant there. And that's what we were set apart to do, right? Grow bigger and better fruit, live lovingly, and love each other just like Jesus loved us.